from the 20th century from the historic resort in eastern Contra Costa County. And for the next few minutes, we're going to be progressing from the Civil War era through the Art Nouveau era, on to World War II, and then contemporary historic preservation in eastern Contra Costa County. And so let's begin. For those of you who are not familiar with where Byron is, and most people do not know, here is a map with a pullout to give you an idea that it is indeed 60 miles due east of San Francisco in the lower southeast corner of the California Delta. And the Byron Hot Springs predates Byron as a destination and a destination resort. So this is where we're going to be traveling today virtually, is out into the East County. So let's get going here. First of all, welcome to the San Joaquin Delta. This is the Byron Hot Springs as it is, Abraham Lincoln administration. Initially, it was 40 acres, claimed by 4 different men, equaling 160 acres, paid for with a Mexican-American War land grant, military land grant. And the 4 parties, of course, built structures, put up the fence, surveyed it, and began operations. So here is our first image of a this is literally in the 1860s and 1870s. We have a bunkhouse, we have what passes for lodges, and a very, very early photograph of the springs. It moves very quickly and is very prosperous. And here we see that original hotel and the outbuildings all structured over with one roof. You can see at the top a photograph of the era. Note the palm trees. They're going to be growing. And the bottom image, a rotogravure from a brochure showing an elegant aspect of the springs. And you say, springs? Elegant hotel? Yes. The architect for all the Byron Hot Springs hotels is none other than James Reed. James Reed and his brother Merritt, who you know as the architects of the Hotel del Coronado. The hotel on your right, and James Reed on the left. He is the Byron Hot Springs proprietor's best friend. Lewis Mead's best friend, James Reed, like the Hotel del Coronado, such as what we call the second hotel. That is, here we have a Moorish style, classic California Art Nouveau hotel, literally on the site of that first hotel, which of course burns, which is a long time California hotel tradition, burning down. And then the interior, and if you've been to the Hotel Coronado recently, you will recognize a very similar interior space. The Byron Hot Springs Hotel features water in every room, and every room faces out of doors. So this is indeed the home of health, not only for drinking the waters, but also breathing the air. So an elegant facility. And you can see the the palm trees are growing. Here's the top of that hotel again, and you can see the palm court, which is the area in front of the hotel, is getting taller and greener. You know, the soil in the area is full of minerals. So if you're going to get anything to grow, you have to bring in about 8 feet of peat from the California Delta. And that's indeed what the owner Lewis Mead did. He is growing things because he's brought in all the peat land, which is incredibly fertile. So watch these palm trees grow, huh? Here is Mr. and Mrs. Mead taking the waters. Yes, this is circa 1910, and they are stepping down into the white sulfur spring. The spring is bubbling up from behind this rock, and you can see Mr. Mead has a glass and he's toasting his wife with white sulfur. Yes, sulfur will cure what ails you. And you can go to other springs. This sort of stone igloo is a liver spring. You're going to be drinking the waters from this spring to cure what ails you regarding liver disease or kidney disease. By the way, this man is Lewis Mead's son. So this is becoming a family and a generational project. Um, the nice thing about liver and kidney waters is indeed it is for purposes of curing liver and kidney disease. Remember, all this is happening before we did pills. The springs are all about sanitarium and drinking the waters. They're not about sitting in the mud, although later there will be mud baths, but they'll be in claw-footed bathtubs initially. So we're going to the springs, our home of health, for health. Mud baths do occur later, and these mud baths are being built in the 1920s. And there's even what's known as a warm salt plunge. Yes, there's over 50 mineral springs at the Byron Hot Springs. One of them is a salt plunge. It's warm, and it's known in the 1920s as the Baths of Beauty. Initially, men pretty much came to the springs, but in the 20s, the ladies discovered the benefits of salt water for their complexion. And of course, fire takes its toll on the beautiful 1902 to 1912 Moorish Hotel. And in anticipation of the Panama Pacific International Exhibition, the Little Fairmont is constructed. Constructed in that this should look reminiscent to the San Francisco Hotel Fairmont, which is built by architect James Reed as well. So this at the time is known as the Little Fairmont because the Meads who own the springs live in San Francisco at the Fairmont, and then James Reed builds them a little Fairmont at the springs to welcome the Panama Pacific International Exhibition crowds. So you see, things are continuing on. And here's a particularly beautiful photograph of the hotel. Notice once more, we're planting palm trees. And there's little palm trees here in these tubs, and these palms will continue to grow bigger and bigger. This is a great place to vacation, merely 60 miles from San Francisco. And you can see this lovely honeymoon couple in their Ray-Bans. Yes, this is from the 20s. And these are Ray-Bans and a couple sitting in front of one of the original palm trees that we saw a few slides back. Once more, if you're not familiar with the Fairmont Hotel in San Francisco, I hope you can see the similarity in terms of Italianate design between the third Byron Hot Springs Hotel and the Fairmont. We have celebrities, of course, that are coming to the springs over the years. On the left, Jack London. On your right, Thaddeus Arbuckle, who loved the pies at the Byron Cafe. And then, of course, not to forget Clark Gable and Kay Spreckles Gable, known as the Spreckles divorcee. She divorces the son of Alma Spreckles in San Francisco. and comes back and marries later in life her first romance, Clark Gable, who, of course, often vacationed at the springs with her. Don't tell anyone. You get extra points today if you recognize this man. Yes, he is celebrating our longtime sheriff, um, Sheriff Veal, but you should particularly recognize this man for Alameda County, Governor of California, and then Supreme Court Justice. Yes, this is Earl Warren. Supreme Court Justice Earl Warren, one of the common and frequent visitors to the Byron Hot Springs. But there's more. During the Depression, of course, many operations were not as prosperous as they had been. And as World War II breaks out, the owners of the springs lease the property to a war interrogation facility. No, this is not for American Nisei. These are for true prisoners of war, particularly Japanese prisoners of war that are picked up in the Pacific and at Iwo Jima. And they spend their time here in now called Camp Tracy, being interrogated before being shipped out to Minnesota, where they will spend the rest of the war in POW camps. Somehow, try as you might, the world has changed since World War II, and the resort, of course, eventually goes out of business, has not the following that it might have had in the past. Springs are replaced by pills. You now take milk of magnesia at home in a bottle. So we begin to see the downturn of the Byron Hot Springs to where we are seeing it today, and in fact, perhaps worse condition than we are seeing even here today. This picture is about 15 years ago, and I'm sorry to say it has gone downhill since then. The white sulfur springs are still there, and yes, all 50 springs are still there. The government during World War II capped all the springs because, after all, water suggests a mosquito breeding grounds, and we all know how the US Army does not want to see malaria. So many of the springs were tapped, but it doesn't take much to drill and find those springs still active. So this has been very quick introduction for you today, but I encourage you to learn more, either with, of course, the proverbial book on the left, and if you have a particular interest in the Byron Hot Springs as a World War II interrogation facility, it's a fascinating period of our California history in which 10,000 Japanese prisoners of war found their way to California, Angel Island, Camp Stoneman and Tracy, and on to Camp Tracy for 4 to 2 weeks interrogation before being shipped out to POW camps. So very interesting. And of course, to learn more, contact me at historian at Byron Hot Springs. And I could certainly bore you for hours on every phase of the Byron Hot Springs experience from 1864 through today. Thank you, everyone, and I look forward to your questions. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Carol. That was fascinating, and I'm looking forward to the questions too. I have a few questions myself. So now we're going to dive right into a completely different spring, and these were not hot springs, I understand, But Justin Chapman here has written about the Paradise Springs Resort. And Justin is an award-winning journalist and author of The Hedonistic History of Paradise Springs, which is how I found his name, but he also subsequently wrote a book on it. He's an author, journalist, travel writer, actor, poet, musician, and politician. He was actually the youngest elected member of the Altadena Town Council at the age of 19. And he's the host, producer, and editor of the show Well Read with Justin Chapman. And interesting fact about him, I guess he's a professional child actor, and he performed in dozens of movies, commercials, TV shows, and plays. So welcome, Justin. We're glad to have you here today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Can you see the slide?
Yes.
Okay. So yeah, as you mentioned, my name is Justin Chapman. I'll be telling you about Paradise Springs, which was a debaucherous mountain resort in between Palmdale and Wrightwood, north of Pasadena in the mountains, that was owned by two actor brothers in the 1920s and 30s, where A-list Hollywood stars partied during Prohibition. First, I want to thank the California Preservation Foundation for inviting me today, and I'll give you a little bit of information about me. As you mentioned, I'm a Altadena, Pasadena-based writer and journalist. I was a professional child actor. I was in Jing All the Way with Arnold Schwarzenegger. I played Trey Parker as a kid in Basketball. I played Chuck Norris as a kid in Walker, Texas Ranger. And I was the problem child in Problem Child 3, so, and among other things. So some pretty funny ones. After high school, I got into journalism and local politics. And as mentioned, I was the youngest elected official in LA County on the Altadena Town Council, age 19. I've written for a number of outlets. And I've won some LA Press Club awards, including for the Paradise Springs stories that I did. I've had two books published, one about my travels across Africa and the other about Paradise Springs, which came out earlier this year. And I work as the field representative to the Pasadena City Council member and Vice Mayor Steve Madison. So Paradise Springs is a surprisingly little-known camp with a very rich history. The property was originally owned by a Pasadena attorney named Louis Luckel. Then it was owned by silent film villain Noah Berry Sr. and his brother Wallace Berry. The camp was frequented by Charlie Chaplin, Joseph Kennedy, Francis X. Bushman, Gloria Swanson, Mary Pickford, William Randolph Hearst, Marion Davies, Jack Warner, Cecil B. DeMille, and many others. They threw wild parties there, brewed illegal homemade hooch during Prohibition, hosted tennis tournaments and gambling, and they raised millions of trout there. It then switched gears and became a Christian camp in the late 20th century until it was sold to Hatopia in December 2017. Hatopia is a French glamping company, Glamorous Camping, that has since renovated and reopened the property with yurts that people can rent out. And this is one of the yurts here. So indigenous peoples were, of course, the first to occupy the canyon where Paradise Springs is located, situated at an elevation of 5,200 feet and bordered on both sides by dramatic rock outcroppings and steep ridges and populated with giant oaks, evergreens, poplar, alder, sycamore, and cottonwoods trees. In 1910, Louis Luckel purchased the 165 acres that comprise Paradise Springs for about $200. He is looking for a natural respite from the rigors and confrontational nature of courtroom battles. The lawyer Luckel wanted to establish an upscale retirement campground for his family and friends. He set up 29 portable tents and cabins, and he and his guests went fishing and hunting for bears and antelopes and bighorn sheep. He wanted 7 sons, but ended up with only one nature-hating daughter named Adelaide, who preferred the gentility and social graces of Pasadena to the rugged solitude and wilderness of Paradise Springs. During her first visit to the property in 1913, at age 13, Adelaide allegedly shrieked when she realized she'd have to walk on a dirt. She hopped back into the limousine, never to return, and she soon convinced her father to sell the property, leading to the couple of hard-partying actor brothers, the Berrys, turning the place into a hedonistic wonderland for the stars. Noah Berry Sr. was born in 1882 and grew up on a farm in Missouri. He left home at 14 to sell newspapers in Kansas City, then sold peanuts and candy in theaters and circuses. While selling lemon drops at the Gillis Theater in Kansas City, his booming voice caught the attention of actor Ned Risley, who convinced Berry to start a singing career, and that led to melodramas. His young son, Noah Barry Jr., who would become a successful actor himself in Westerns and, of course, The Rockford Files, suffered a serious illness, leaving his dad with a $8,000 medical bill. Broke, he arrived in LA and booked a role in a suit of armor in Cecil B. DeMille's 1916 movie about Joan of Arc called Joan the Woman. And Paramount signed him and typecast him as a villain in silent movies such as 1921's Tolerable David, 1923's The Spoilers, and 1926's Bojas. A perennial nature lover and self-styled mountain man, Barry Sr. often went hunting in the hills around Mount Baldy. While on a hunting trip in the area in around 1915, Barry Sr. happened upon Paradise Springs and took to it immediately. With the financial aid of his brother Wallace, also an actor who later won an Academy Award for Best Actor for 1931's The Champ, as well as funding from actors Charlie Chaplin and Mary Pickford, he made an offer to purchase the property from Luckel. Adelaide, Luckel's daughter, had convinced her father to accept the offer, and he agreed, but he included a shrewd clause in the sales contract that should the Barrys ever miss a mortgage payment or declare bankruptcy, the property would revert back to Luckel, who later bequeathed the property to Adelaide in his will when just that turn of events came to fruition decades later. The Barry brothers' plan for the property was to cater to the Hollywood elite. They built an elegant ballroom and dining hall with grand vine-covered stone archway entrances, a high-beam ceiling, a polished hardwood dance floor, a 45-foot redwood bar manned by several bartenders, and a big stage enough for a 22-piece orchestra. They also built 27 stone cabins and an Olympic-sized swimming pool where Tarzan actor Johnny Weissmuller trained for the Olympics. A tennis court and 36 fish hatcheries consisting of a series of rock and mortar ponds through which the natural spring stream flowed, and stocked them with 1 million rainbow trout over the years. Barry Sr. built his own river rock cabin next to the peaceful cascading ponds of Paradise Springs and called his new retreat Noah Barry's Paradise Trout Club. Here's a letter Barry wrote to Cecil B. DeMille in 1927 asking him to invest in the club. And here's a 1933 book by a British travel writer with a chapter about Paradise Springs. And here's a map in the book showing Noah Barry's hideaway just north of Pasadena. The brothers soon unveiled their getaway resort for Hollywood stars as the Roaring Twenties got underway. For 7 years, the Trout Club sold 1,500 pounds of fish every other week to two posh swinging Hollywood establishments, the Coconut Grove nightclub at the Ambassador Hotel and the Brown Derby restaurant, two hot spots to see and be seen in old Hollywood if ever there were any. Now, a lot of this information comes from Noah Barry Jr. Himself, who lived at Paradise Springs in the 20s and 30s. Bill Hunt, who was the marketing director for the Christian camp that operated on the Paradise Springs property from 1981 to 2017, interviewed Noah Barry Jr. For 3 days in August 1994, shortly before Barry Jr. died of cerebral thrombosis at the age of 81. Hunt said, you wouldn't believe some of the stuff Barry Jr. told me about what went on at Paradise Springs during the 20s and 30s when the Barry brothers owned it. Everything was so illegal. Some stuff I didn't even want to write down. It was sordid. It was unbelievable. Barry Jr. called Paradise Springs his father's hanky-panky place. For example, in the 20s, Charlie Chaplin built a rickety winding staircase still standing today by himself in Barry Sr.'s cabin. The stairs led up to the second floor bedroom that Chaplin allegedly used for his extramarital romantic trysts. And it was Barry Jr.'s job to warn Chaplin that his wife was coming up the hill so he and his mistress could escape out the back window. Hunt said Charlie Chaplin loved Paradise Springs and invested heavily in its operations and events. For a while, money was no object to the Barrys. They added a small zoo to the property. In its heyday during Prohibition, Paradise Springs hosted up to 1,000 guests each weekend, including the Hollywood elite of the time. The Barrys also had a fierce rivalry going with newspaper magnate William Randolph Hearst and his Hearst Castle in San Simeon. In 1928, during one of the many lavish, exclusive parties thrown by the Barrys in Paradise Springs Grand Ballroom, Hearst allegedly exacted his revenge. The structure had 8 stone archway entrances, one of which was painted red. That door was reserved for the entrance of the diva of the weekend, usually Gloria Swanson. Barry Jr. told Hunt that during a party in May 1928, the ballroom was packed with 1,000 people. Shortly after, Joseph Kennedy escorted Swanson through the red door, and they made their grand entrance and took the seats of honor. There was a loud knock at that red door. When it was opened, a giant buffalo charged past them into the ballroom, taken from the compound zoo and stationed there by Hearst's goons. Pandemonium broke out in the ballroom. The confused animal slid across the dance floor and knocked over tables and chairs as celebrities and starlets in formal attire screamed and scrambled. Teenage Barry Jr. ran up to Noah's Ark, his father's cabin, and yelled, "Dad, there's a buffalo in the ballroom." Barry Sr. hurried down to the ballroom, grabbed a shotgun from behind the bar, jumped up on top of the bar, and shot the beast. He then invited his guests to return the following week for a free buffalo barbecue. Hunt said many believe Hearst was the one who hired the thugs to drag the buffalo into the ballroom. The Trout Club and Barry Sr.'s paradise did not last forever, however. In 1930, the Grand Ballroom was destroyed by mysterious fire, and only the stone arches survived, which remained until Hitopia renovated the property and removed the arches in 2021 due to earthquake safety concerns. This is where the ballroom once stood. It also turned out that the mountain water was too cold for trout propagation, upon which Barry Sr.'s business plan was dependent. His box office draw started to fade, and he went bankrupt in 1940, thus triggering the clause in the original sales contract with Louis Luckel that reverted the entire 165-acre property back to the Pasadena attorney who had originally sold Paradise Springs to Barry Sr. Barry Sr. died in 1946 of a heart attack at age 64, and his brother Wallace died 3 years later, also age 64. Upon Luckel's death in 1952, his daughter Adelaide came into possession of Paradise Springs per his will. Adelaide leased the property to a succession of entrepreneurs over the next few years in the 50s to operate as limited resort businesses, but none of them had much success in turning a profit. She then entrusted management of the property to her nephew, Lawrence Gunner Payne, who operated a Christian camp there, in stark contrast to the property's racy past. The camp's new rules were no alcohol, no gambling, and no dances. Sunday services took the place of debaucherous ballroom shindigs with no interruptions from party-crashing buffalo. Paradise Springs Campground opened in spring 1971 by Gunner Payne, but the effort drained the Payne family so much that by 1981, Payne sold it to 4 families who continued the Christian emphasis and called it Big Rock Creek Camp. It also had a zoo, albeit with a somewhat less exotic variety of beast. And by 2017, without a significant amount of new investment, the 4 families who owned Big Rock Creek Camp felt they could no longer continue to operate the camp, and they were in talks to sell the property to Nestle, the Swiss multinational food and beverage conglomerate, which was interested in the water from the spring on the property, which generates up to 1 million gallons a day. Luckily, they decided to sell to the French glamping company Hitopia instead. Hitopia is founded in France in 2000, and it planned to keep Paradise Springs as a camp with a focus on families and to invest in upgrading the property. And at this point, it was 144 acres. One of the families of the Christian camp kept some of the acres for their own property. Hitopia has camp locations throughout Europe, China, and North America. Paradise Springs was their first location on the U.S. West Coast, though they subsequently developed another one in California's wine country. Hitopia is very interested in the history and culture of Paradise Springs, and they highlight that history, including Chaplin's hand-built staircase. So people can rent out the Noah's Ark cabin and see the staircase that he built. You can't go up to the second floor anymore, but there's lots of posters and books and history about the old Hollywood time at Paradise Springs in the cabin. They've also maintained many of the existing structures, cabins, river rock ponds, the kitchen, the pool, and other features that survive from the Barry, Payne, and Big Rock Creek camp eras. So I came to know about Paradise Springs by my wife's uncle was a friend of the owner of Hitopia. So after Hitopia bought it, but before they renovated it, we visited Paradise Springs. We interviewed the Christian camp owners and the Hitopia owners, and I wrote 2 articles about Paradise Springs, one for LAist and one for Pasadena Now. Then I wrote a much longer version, which Hitopia itself purchased and published as a book. Earlier this month, the book was a finalist in the nonfiction book category of the LA Press Club's National Arts and Entertainment Journalism Awards. And right now, for now, the book is only sold either at Paradise Springs Camp Store, and the address is here on screen, or through me by emailing me at jdchapman15@hotmail.com. So that's it for now. Happy to take any questions, and thank you again to the California Preservation Foundation.
Thank you, Justin. Okay, never mind. I was gonna stop share here. Fascinating histories, but from both of you. And I'm more familiar with Byron than I am with Paradise. But maybe I'll start. I'm going to keep an eye on the Q&A box here for people asking questions. And as a reminder, if you use the Q&A box, I'm more likely to see it. And also, if you'd like to ask your question of our panel in person, I can keep an eye on the attendee list. If you have a raised hand, I'll enable your microphone so you can ask your question in person. I'll start with a question, actually. I think this is an interesting question for um, just in terms of the general kind of uh, will to protect these places, right? Because both of these places are in various states of I wouldn't say decay, but just loss. And a lot of the original fabric of these places has been lost to time. Um, Carol and Justin both. I guess my question really is, Justin, you highlighted Coconut Grove and the Brown Derby, and these are famous places in Los Angeles that there were long preservation battles for both of those, one of which was lost and one was somewhat saved. And I'm wondering why places like Paradise and Byron are not given the same sort of like will to protect them, or maybe they just don't have the resources. Or maybe the use of them is a challenging kind of prospect in terms of figuring out a new use for these purpose-built kind of places. So I'm asking each of you maybe why you think these places sort of fell by the wayside, and if there's anything you think we as historic preservation people can learn from this, and maybe find ways to protect these places and restore them back to their former glory in any way. So I'll start with Carol on that. How can we ensure these places are protected, and why do you think they, unlike the Brown Derby and the Ambassador Hotel, why do you think they don't get the same level of attention?
Thank you, Justin. That's always the million-dollar question I'm asked constantly and repeatedly regarding the Byron Hot Springs, given its importance not only locally but in the greater Northern California um, hotel ex resort experience. Um, Times change, and there's no answer that will hold true from the 1960s to today, because the county of Contra Costa has gone through now its third general plan since the 1960s. The current general plan and the zoning in Contra Costa County identifies the extreme east of Contra Costa County as the agricultural zone. This is a very small part of the county. We're not talking 14,000 acres dedicated to agriculture out of the entire county. Byron Hot Springs now is within the agricultural zone. It is not with the rest of the county. As such, the county imposes upon it only agricultural uses, not resort or forest recreational uses as zoning allowed in the past. So the idea of making it once more a resort, a destination resort as it was originally and was for 100 years, is pretty much out the window. The current owner could grow agricultural crops on the land and sell that on the property, like grapes, winery, and the like, or almonds. But, it's very difficult to grow crops in minerally rich land. You want loam or peat. You don't want sulfur, magnesium, molybdenum, uh, and sulfur. Crops do not really do well in that kind of soil. And so, I don't want to be a conspiracy theorist, but funny how that is, that the Byron Hot Springs is located adjacent to the Byron Airport, which is the official County of Contra Costa airport, uh, the major airport for private jets in Contra Costa County, and yet it cannot be developed into a hotel, accommodations, restoration, or the like. So exceedingly frustrating for those of us who would like to see it restored and people be allowed to come onto the site and recreate. But this is going to be a matter of fighting the Contra Costa County General Plan or coming up with the proverbial Plan B. I sit as the chairperson for the County Historic Landmarks Committee, advising the County Board of Supervisors. And this has been our number one issue in terms of restoration for the last 20 years. So as they say, stay tuned. Thank you for the question.
Oh, I think you're muted, John.
Thank you. I'm usually telling other people that they're muted. No, there's a slightly different story with Paradise Springs that from Byron. They each have their own sort of destiny in history, and I'm wondering what you think, Justin, because they sort of disasters befell Paradise Springs early in its earlier, than they did with Byron, and do you think it was all thanks to Hearst or other reasons?
Well, some people suspect Hearst is the one who burned down the ballroom, but that's of course not proven.
Yeah.
But its location is prone to disasters. There was a major 100-year flood in 1938 that wrecked a lot of the property. Just a few years ago, there was a major fire that burned through the mountains right up near Paradise Springs, and they're watching it, wondering if that was going to go. And thankfully it was spared. So it's subject to those kinds of disasters. Originally, it was a private club and invite only, and they wanted to keep it quiet because they were doing illegal things there. And then maybe because of its remote location, they subsequent owners couldn't get a camp to work. It was a pretty low-key Christian camp for decades, where they had church groups and students come and camp there. But it was a small operation. And of course, it almost got bought by Nestle just for the water purposes, which would have been pretty controversial if it had happened. And it's from a preservation standpoint, it's pretty lucky that Hatopia bought it and they must have spent millions of dollars buying and renovating it. And it was really run down at the time they bought it, and it's gorgeous now. It's one of my favorite places to go. Their yurts are really fun to stay in, and they've really highlighted the history in a way that well, certainly Nestle wouldn't have, but also other owners, if they had bought it, wouldn't have. So that was probably the best case scenario at the right time for Hatopia to come in and buy it from a preservation standpoint.
Yeah, and one thing that struck me about your presentation was seeing the ruins of the ballroom, which I think are compelling in their own way in terms of, I think they would, if properly, and I recognize the fact that they were potentially a hazard. But I'm wondering if Hatopia or others were looking at possibilities of maybe reinforcing those structures and leaving them in place to kind of tell the story of the site, or maybe even reconstructing them in a safer manner. Was that ever part of the thought process, or?
Yeah, as I understand it, they wanted to save them and looked into it, and it may have even been the county, LA County, that said no, these aren't structurally sound. It was really cool, right? When you enter the property and and walk along the pool, and on the other side are these pretty big stone archways, and that obviously looked under 100 years old, you know. And so it was disappointing that they had to take them down, but they wanted to preserve them, but I think they might have been told that they couldn't keep them.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, sometimes it's just not, you do everything you can to save those things, and if there's no solution, there's no solution. So I have a question here. This is for Justin. The trees at Paradise Springs are quite large. Has a wildfire ever hit the area?
Yep, just a few years ago, it came right up to the property. It was pretty scary. And that was right as Hatopia was getting going. They did a soft launch, I believe, 2021, the summer of 21. And I want to say the fire was right around then. It was that year or maybe the year before or after. I have to double check. But it was a major fire in the north side of San Gabriel Mountains, and nearly wiped out Paradise Springs. As you're driving towards it, 5 minutes away from arrival, it's burnt trees everywhere,
Mm. Yeah. As in much of California. Byron doesn't have the same kind of risk, I imagine. But there's a question here, Carol, so I'm going to direct it to you about Byron. And it's about the options that lay before us now. And the question is saying the owner essentially, according to them, or according to their thought, is that there's two options here. You either tear it down, or if you're not going to tear it down, you have to secure it and make sure that vandals or others don't cause irreparable damage to what remains. So, what do you think the path forward is with Byron? Do you think it needs to be sort of secured from vandalism? Do you think it needs to be torn down and reconstructed? Or, I mean, what are the options now?
Thank you. Excellent question. First of all, the Byron Hot Springs is 160 acres. The original area that had dwellings, cabins, barns, mud baths, hotel is less than 40 acres. It's located in a remote area. It's very, very easy to, as they say, hop the fence and get in there. And people do. Um, the current owner of the property, which is the Court Family Trust out of San Francisco, has applied for and received from the county planning department a permit to stabilize the hotel. They received that permit over 2 years ago. Nothing has been done. Uh, Tear it down. The building itself is not brick. It is reinforced concrete. And the architect, James Reed, learned all about reinforced concrete from Julia Morgan, who advised the Reeds regarding the Fairmont Hotel. She taught them everything they needed to know. So the rebar in this hotel is not 12 inches on center, it's 6 inches on center. There have been prior owners who have literally set off dynamite in the hotel in hopes of causing its collapse so they could sell the brick. So very difficult, but eventually, all things will fall down. The structure itself is sinking, and a corner of its foundations are off center, so it's no longer true. Hence, it's going to have some eventual falling down. It's probably easier, and there's been plenty of architects scrounging all over it over the years to see that indeed it could be restored as opposed to torn down. This is not a mud hut. This thing is built like 6 inches on center, concrete, reinforced rebar. Man, this thing, it doesn't want to go.
Mm.
But what to do? The current owners are not really inclined to sell it. They purchased the entire property less than 10 years ago for $1 million. And whereas they do have a permit to, quote, stabilize the hotel, they haven't moved on this in years, even though they do have the permit. What to do when you have the restrictions of being in the agricultural core of Contra Costa County? It's very limited. You couldn't run a hotel. You can't make a hostelry out of this.
Mhm.
So there's a dilemma. I I think there's potential here. And I do have my own particular plan for this. However, the courts are not predisposed to sell the property at all. As in, we don't have to, we're not going to. And they're in the enviable position of not having to sell that which they do not wish to. So I'm not sure what we can do under the current private ownership, but I think there might be some things we can do with regard to the federal government if we could get them to acquire it in some departmental level. Because on the East Coast, we have Fort Hunt, which was the other World War II military interrogation facility, which was just outside of Alexandria, Virginia. It's National Park Service land now. There's nothing left to that interrogation facility today at all, whereas Byron is still here. And this is indeed the place where the Japanese prisoners of war were interrogated, and lots of them. And so the National Park Service has certainly had quite an interest in this property, to say the least. But Byron Hot Springs is presently privately held. So
Yeah. And can you remind me, I don't know if you went over this in your presentation, but this Byron Hot Springs is on the National Register. Is that right?
it's on the Contra Costa Historic Landmarks. It's
Okay.
on the state landmark list, and it's on the federal landmark list. But
Yeah,
that, I mean, that's wonderful.
but
But
it's
if
yeah.
you can't do things due to county restrictions, you can't. I mean, it's like congratulations, you're an historic landmark, and that in $1.50 you can ride. You can ride a bus. It doesn't result in conservation or restoration or reuse.
Yeah, that's what we always have to tell people is that people in historic preservation advocacy is that the US has very weak historic preservation laws when you compare them to places like Europe, where a landmark actually means something from a regulatory standpoint. Um, but their honorary designations, it's essentially a plaque and maybe access to some incentives if you're able to creatively reuse the building. But the other thing I maybe want to ask about, Carol, is this whole history of sort of the wartime history, kind of the interrogation history of the site, and it seems like there's potential for the site not just as a building and as the architecture, which is notable in its own realm, but in terms of sort of information about the war, sort of that side of the history. And there's, as you mentioned, there's very few sites in the U.S. that sort of remain from that. And has there ever been an effort to either archaeologically gather information from the site or figure out what you can learn from the interrogation of the Japanese prisoners on that site? And is there any research or archival materials that sort of shed light on that kind of side of the site's story?
Indeed, and I should send you my $20 for feeding me that question because yes, the for the period that Byron was an interrogation facility, all those records are in the National Archives there, not in Washington, D.C., but in Baltimore. And a Japanese film crew sent out by NHK spent over a year with 6 men working every day at the National Archives, pulling out every record you can think of regarding the Japanese experience at Camp Tracy, photocopying every record and shipping it back to Japan. Subsequently, there was a movie filmed on this for which I was a consultant. Secondly, a book printed in the Japanese language um, on the experience based on the historic records from the National Archive. I hope artificial intelligence grows and becomes so successful because the ultimate use of AI will be if we can get it to translate the Japanese character script so we could get this book translated. I've attempted to get it translated, but it will cost me $20,000 for a human to do it. I want AI to translate this Japanese book, which will tell us about the experience. There are many individuals who were American Japanese who served during World War II and were interrogators here at the Byron Hot Springs. Many non-Japanese but fluid Japanese language speakers also worked here. The initial military intelligence service that is down in Monterey, the Monterey Language Institute at the Army base there, started in San Francisco with the education and training of Japanese military intelligence officers in San Francisco. This is the beginnings of our MIS language school in Monterey, is literally here, people being trained to work at Camp Tracy.
Hmm.
There's tons of academic information on that, and it's just wonderful, and more always digs up. We even know the name of every prisoner of war from Japan that came through the Byron Hot Springs. We got them by name, age, and rank. So thank you for that question. There's tons of information regarding the war years. Oh, and the information, and in conclusion on that, at Camp Tracy, information was not extracted by torture. It's not an Abu Ghraib kind of situation. We're not plugging people into or waterboarding them. The food that was served here was Japanese home cooking. Yeah, cooking. And people, all the rooms were bugged. People could talk to each other. Every word was eavesdropped upon. And so much information was extracted as to where the weapons plants were in Japan, which side of the railroad were they located. So when we did bomb, we didn't bomb the residences, we bombed the airplane manufacturing plant itself. We received so much information out of Byron Hot Springs that concluded and helped us decide where in Japan we would be dropping the nuclear weaponry.
Hmm.
So, short of the Manhattan Project down there in the desert, you figure out the bomb, and then the question is where to put it. And that information came out of Byron Hot Springs.
Yeah, that's fascinating. It could almost make an entire feature-length documentary of its own, produced by Ken Burns or something.
Actually,
Yeah.
there have been it's actually two Japanese movies
Okay.
Japanese producers on exactly this information and experience.
Wow. I'll have to look into that. Well, I'm going to close out with one final question for maybe for Justin here. Paradise Springs, it had this sort of Hollywood history, just as Byron did. And there's something interesting about this kind of Hollywood connection where, um, you know, uh, there's sort of an escape going out to these sites where there's also a reality to it, but there's also these fantastical elements that, you'd think would only belong in a movie, like this whole series, or this whole event with the buffalo. Um, it almost seems like almost not real life in a way. And I'm wondering if you thought, why did Hollywood find places like this compelling? Why did they go outside of, you know, downtown Hollywood and move out into the country to go to a place like this? What was it that made it special?
Well, one of the reasons, especially at the time during Prohibition, is they wanted a place far away from prying eyes and law enforcement to do whatever they wanted, to party and drink and have fun. And so that was probably a prime motivator for the original actor brothers. It's also just a absolutely gorgeous place. I mean, it's a true getaway, and one of the best kept secrets in the area for a very long time. And that's its natural beauty, and the spring that went down through the center of it popped up out of the ground in the mountains and went down several hundred yards and then disappeared again before going out into the desert of Palmdale. It is just such a remote, lush, private location that's just like a place to reconnect with nature, and um, uh, it's not just for Hollywood stars, but that's who could afford it at the time. Um, it's especially city folk from Los Angeles. There's very few places like that nearby, an hour and a half driving distance to get to. So it was a special place, and still a special place today. I'd recommend everyone checking it out.
Thank you, and thank you both. I'm going to close everything out here today. I wanted to remind everybody that we have a part three next Tuesday for this, and also to encourage you to take a look at our annual auction. This series is usually developed in concert with our annual auction, and you can go to californiapreservation.org/bid, BID, to check out some of the items, some of which relate to the histories that we've talked about today. And uh, Give to CPF if you feel the need and feel generous before the end of the year. All donations to us are tax deductible, and you can go to californiapreservation.org/donate to give. Thank you everybody for attending this series. Thank you to our speakers. I'm going to leave the final words to our presenters to leave our audience with any final thoughts you have. So I'll start with Carol and then maybe Justin after that.
Indeed, if you're in Hollywood, first things first, head to Paradise Springs. It's only an hour and a half away. And then, if you really need to get away or really need to sin, get on a train and come to the Byron Hot Springs.
Thanks again to the California Preservation Foundation for having me. Check out my book. I'm actually planning to expand it into a even longer book with more of the Hollywood history at the time and the actor brothers and their career and Chaplin and all of that. And go and spend a weekend at Paradise Springs in one of the glamping yurts that they have there. It's really beautiful.
Thank you. And with that, I'm going to close out and we'll see you next Tuesday for a history of department stores, shopping malls, and the history of retail design in California and beyond. So we hope to see you there. It's another free program. So see you next Tuesday at 12 noon. Thank you both.
Thank you.